Hey everyone, we're back for another episode of Ask GN. You can leave questions in the comments below, or if you're a Patreon backer, there's a Discord channel called Ask GN. Leave your questions there. We check the comment section and Discord every time for questions for the video. We have some good ones this time. One particularly about the EVGA Hybrid Kit. I've seen a lot of people ask this question about the pump making some noise. We've got a solution for you on that. That's a common question. And then a couple of other interesting ones just about air versus liquid cooling, about why NVIDIA has moved away from increasing voltage like they used to allow on older cards, things like that. Before getting to that, this content is brought to you by v1tech.com. V1Tech makes the custom backplates on the table. We've got an Asus ROG Strix one here that was on our 1080 Ti, and then this is a reference board design with an EVGA backplate. So they make those. If you like the custom backplates, you can go to v1tech.com and use code GamersNexus5, the number 5, for $5 off. I believe these sell for about $40 with the cheaper ones starting at around $25. Pretty cool stuff if you want to blend out your PC a bit in an easy fashion. So check them out. They are a new advertiser of ours. Getting to the first question, we've got one from André Zabuscha, who says, hopefully I said that right, says, my EVGA Hybrid Kit has horrible coil whine noise. It is the same used for GN hybrids. Frowny face. So that really pulled at my heartstrings with the frowny face there. Yeah, so the hybrid kits, the thing, really any of the pumps that don't have variable fan or pump RPM can produce a pump whine. It's not the most common thing, or at least it's not the most common thing people complain about, because normally your fan noise is higher than the pump noise, especially depending on the case. If you have like a foam damped case, then you're probably even better off. You're less likely to notice. But that's not the best solution. The best solution is just to not have the noise in the first place. So we don't normally hear the pump whine noise out of the liquid coolers that we've tested lately. There are some instances where I'll pick it up, like some of the older non-branded Asetek pumps, as they age after a year or two of abusive use, they might start making some noise just from the pump RPM being higher, but you can lower it and that noise goes away. The same applies for the EVGA Hybrid Kit. The problem with that, though, is that in order to lower the noise on the Hybrid Kit pump or any other, like a Seahawk, they're all the same. To lower the noise on those, since they are CLCs, if you recall installing it, they plug in through basically a splitter. So the pump and the VRM fan plug into the same cable, and then that plugs into GPU power. So on one of these, there's one cable for the GPU fan power. It plugs in there, and that controls both the pump and the VRM fan, which would be the circular blower fan. So that means that you have no access to the RPMs through this. So you have to go into the motherboard. The way to do this, there's about a $10 cable you can buy, it might be a bit less, and the cable is a very specific one. On one end, it's a GPU fan header, so I think it's a 4-pin, and it's that weird shape and pin spacing that the GPU fans use. It's not the same as a case fan. One end is that, the other end is a normal case fan header. It's either a 3 or 4-pin, and you can plug that into the motherboard. I'll try and find a link for it and put it in the description below if I can find it. But they're about $10, and what you do is you'll have to take it back apart. Actually, you don't have to take all of it apart. You would take, let's see, let's take this off. These are magnetic, by the way, so pretty easy to install. But these, pretend there's a pump here. You would take this part off, so it's not that hard. You just unscrew these and pull that off of there. And you'll have to fight it a little bit because you're not doing it from scratch. But then you can remove the header that's plugged into the board. And at that point, you can plug that into the extender cable, plug that into the motherboard, and then my suggestion is run it through DC power, set it to about 90%. Once you're at 90%, the whine should be gone. It runs slower, or slow enough comparatively, that the pump whine pretty much goes away, and you don't lose a ton of cooling ability, because really the pump speed 90 versus 100%, all you're doing is changing how fast the liquid is moving through the cold plate area, so that can impact temperatures. But as we've said in the past, it's not necessarily a huge amount. Certainly not enough to care about when you're already sub 60 C, maybe even close to 50 C or less, depending on the card you're cooling. So hopefully that helps. Basically, buy the cable, plug it into the motherboard, set DC power to the pump to about 90%. You can go a bit lower if you have to, but just play around in that range and find one where the noise goes away or it's inaudible compared to your system fan noise. And then I would also recommend either plugging the EVGA hybrid radiator fan into the motherboard or buying a different fan and plugging it into the motherboard and controlling that through PWM or DC power as well, rather than off the video card, which will run it at higher speeds than necessary to keep a reasonably cool temperature. And then you'll have a really damn quiet video card. It'll be quieter than air-cooled cards at that point, except for perhaps idle. And your VRM fan can go back into the board power. Next question is Mikah Mitchell, who says, why were power limits put on the Pascal architecture specifically? It seems that the 1080 series is amazing, but the only thing holding it back in overclocking is the voltage limitations. As a bonus, how would you speculate the overclocks to be if there were no limits? How much a difference would it really make? So for the first part of the question, anyone who's around for Kepler and Kepler 600 series and Fermi 400 series, you may remember that at that time there were a lot less restrictions on voltage. So you could set your voltage offset a bit higher. You could well, power wasn't all that much different, but the voltage offset was. So the thing that changed is basically too many people were overvolting their cards to a point where they really shouldn't have been, either because they didn't know what they were doing or they hadn't yet, as a community, figured out what the safe voltage was for the card. So they're overvolting it, which is something you do for overclocking anyway. It's just a matter of how much. And the cards didn't have the strict protections that they have now, where now you can drive that slider up to 100% voltage. It's not going to kill your card. They're not going to let you drive voltage up in any real capacity that will damage the device. In fact, you can set it at 100%, run it for its entire life, and it'll live just as long as if you set it at 0%. And the reason that it is, just to give a primer on Pascal first, is because when you change the voltage permitted to Pascal and overclocking tools, it's not actually overvolting it. It'll draw the same voltage as if you left it alone. All it's doing is, well, it really mostly just gives you something psychologically to feel like you have an effect over what the card's doing. But I've heard some people say that it increases the speed at which the voltage is supplied to the GPU, at the speed at which it's made ready for use. But that doesn't really change a whole lot other than how quickly you ramp into boost clocks. And the difference is not going to be that great, especially if you're gaming for more than a few seconds anyway. So that doesn't do a whole lot. But 400 series, 600 series, it did a bit more, especially the 400 series. And if you look around on forums, what you'll see is a whole bunch of people overclocking their Fermi or Kepler cards really high, particularly Fermi. I don't remember too well how far Kepler was going. But Fermi, I believe I remember that one going high. Regardless, one of them overvolted pretty high, overclocked pretty high as a result. People post their numbers, and then you see them coming back sometime later, and their card died or they had some kind of issue, and it's because they were volting it way too high, at least for the stock configuration. Now, people like BuildZoid, the pro overclocker we work with, people like him, they can deal with that no problem. One, they're probably testing for a short period of time. Two, they might be using exotic cooling or just better cooling in general. And three, they have a damn good idea of what they're doing, the pro overclockers. So there's a big difference there between that scene and an enthusiast. So because NVIDIA doesn't cater to the pro overclocking scene, they basically just got rid of overvolting in any capacity that could damage the card, which unfortunately means that you also lose some of the overclocking capacity. So there's a bit of a trade. People like us, where we're perfectly happy to overvolt it if it means getting a higher clock, we lose out. And I'm sure that's true for a lot of you as well, because you either don't care about killing the card, or if you do, you just are more careful about how much you overvolt it and check guides and things. So you miss out. You get a lower voltage as a result, but the consumer as a whole is more protected. So it's one of those things of how much do you need the company to protect you from your own stupidity versus how much are you willing to take responsibility for it if you go a step too far. And NVIDIA decided to protect the customers from their own stupidity. So that's largely why those voltage limitations exist now, And if you look around, there's really not a lot of overvolted to death stories about Pascal. They probably die from something else instead, like a bad component somewhere. So I think that covers that. How much of a difference would it make, you're asking, if this were not a thing? We've been looking into this, so I'm not going to make any promises. Not sure when we can do this. But BuildZoid has talked a bit on our channel about doing shunt mods, where you short the shunts out with liquid metal. You could solder them, but it's safer to do liquid metal. And they're those really tiny shunts on the side. They're normally on the right side of the card near the pinout. And you can short those with liquid metal. In theory, that screws up the voltage and power detection on Pascal GPUs enough where you can actually get some extra power out of it beyond what it would normally allow you to do. So that's something we're looking into. No promises on if or when it'll happen, but theoretically, you could look at people who have done the shunt mods, see what their overclock is, and see how far they've gone. I believe there's a GTX 1060 out there that was a Galax card that went beyond, I'm not sure off the top of my head. I want to say it went 2100, 2200 megahertz, which is pretty far for a 1060. I want to say it was 2200, but maybe even higher actually. But either way, there are a couple people, pro overclockers with the right tools and the right knowledge, who can hard mod the thing to go pretty far. Now, how long does it live? I don't have an answer for you on that, not a large enough sample size, but hopefully that gives a basic understanding. Next question is from SSG Smith, who actually, let me look at these last ones. I believe all of the previous two questions were from YouTube directly. We've got some Discord ones coming up. SSG Smith 51 says, so long story short, I deploy early next year with the US Army. I want to get a gaming laptop so when I have some downtime, I can forget I'm in a hot and sandy place by playing games and watching movies. My question is, what should I be looking for in a gaming laptop that would be durable and cool enough that I can use it in the desert without sand or heat destroying it? This encompasses not only build quality, but also how it cools and how much heat it produces. Thanks. So first of all, that is a really interesting question, and it's a difficult one to really find a perfect fit for, because that would be one of the most extreme environments you could possibly take a laptop into, aside from maybe the Arctic, where you've got the opposite end of the problem. So there are ruggedized PCs, they're called. If you look for the word ruggedized PC, I don't know if that's a trademarked word from Dell or if other people use it too, but those exist. They are laptops that are built like tanks. They are normally used or made specifically for applications like military. I believe police and fire use them and things like that. So ruggedized PCs would be the place to start. Now the problem is, I looked through these a bit for you, and most of them that are out there do not have a gaming grade GPU in them, which kind of makes sense, because with a ruggedized PC, you're enclosing the thing in so much armor, which is to keep dust out. Some of them are fireproof, or at least fire resistant, and then they can withstand all kinds of drop force and shock and vibe issues and things like that. So because of all that, it means that they have restricted ventilation normally. It means that they have pretty bad battery life because they're running warmer. And so they don't normally put a DGPU in there. So that's a problem for gaming. There are a few out there. I don't know a whole lot about them, so I'm not going to name them, but there are ruggedized PCs. Specifically, Dell makes a few of them, and then there are a few other vendors as well I've seen. I don't know anything about their products. Now, if you're looking for a more standard laptop, the problem with ruggedized, I've kind of listed most of them, no DGPU for the most part. If someone knows of one, though, please link it below. But the other problem is they are expensive. So they can withstand a whole hell of a lot of abuse, but you can even drive cars over some of them. That's how beefed up they are. It won't crack the screen or anything, but they're expensive because of that. So if you're more of a consumer and paying for it yourself, really what you have to look out for is where is the ventilation on the laptop. So I would look around at a few miles. We've mostly tested MSI stuff lately. I don't know that they would be the best for use in the desert, but a lot of laptops have either intake in the bottom or intake through the back or sides. It depends on what, it's one or the other. It's either bottom intake or it's back or side intake around the display. And I would say look at where the intakes are and consider doing your own dust filter mod. Buy like a really fine dust filter. We don't have any cases around me with one on it, but some of the cases, like I think I want to say the P400, there's a couple others that have those really fine magnetic dust filters. Get one of those and cut it to size and see if you can mod the laptop and shove that in into the ventilation port. Maybe get rid of whatever's in there default. Because the ones that they put in there, they're okay for things like cat hair or large pieces of dust, but dust still gets in laptops, as you all know. So put a finer dust filter and do a mod on it, and that should help. I don't know that it'll keep sand out. That's pretty fine, but it'll keep a lot of the other stuff out. So that would be an approach where you kind of DIY a solution without going hardcore ruggedized PC. And other than that, you're probably going to want to be plugged in all the time if it's possible, because these don't have great battery life. Keeping it cool enough is going to, I think to keep it cool is largely going to be to keep it free of sand and dust. So it may be a decent idea to grab a toolkit if you have enough downtime to spend 40 minutes every couple months and clean the thing out. We've got those iFixit toolkits that have every screw you could want through a Gamers Nexus coupon code. So if you want to do that, you can grab one of that through our old advertisements and sponsorships and things. We've got links on the channel, but that's what I would do because it's cheaper, and DIY means you can fine tune it to your needs. I would probably try and reduce the amount of intake through the bottom though of the laptop and keep it elevated if you can. Next question is Notwist, or Notwist. Notwist says, this is from Discord, says, follow-up question for AskGN regarding air versus water cooling. What makes a 120mm CLC more effective than a heatsink fan combo at cooling something? This is a very fundamental question that's kind of interesting. Considering high-end GPU heatsinks seem to have more nickel-plated copper compared to the aluminum-finned radiators used in standard CLCs, wouldn't it stand to reason that the heatsinks would be better overall at dispersing heat? It seems the primary use for a CLC is redirecting the heat, but unless you're using mini ITX for ambient, temps might be an issue. It doesn't seem like it would matter. Additionally, FTW3 or similar cards have 3 100mm fans versus the 120mm fan on the radiator, which should allow quieter operation by running the fans at lower RPM. Maybe I'm missing something. So this is all well accounted for. These are all the fine points that we mentioned in reviews. Now, let's see. They had an addendum. I know the argument about how the block itself is copper and water is better heat dissipation than air, but since it still requires the radiator to actually cool the liquid, the efficiency seems bottlenecked by the radiator materials, even if it's copper. So regarding that, all it does is redirect the heat. That's pretty much what any heatsink does in these things. Its entire job is to get the heat off of the GPU and out into the case or into the world. That said, there's a few things here that should answer this, get you on the road to understanding what's going on. The first one is that what is being cooled? So with the hybrid cards, you are cooling the GPU silicon itself, and you've got your pump routes through, or tubes route through, cool the GPU silicon, and the radiator spits it out of the case. But how are your VRMs cooled? How's your VRAM cooled? That is cooled by the base plate still, and by the blower fan that's on the card probably. So that's the first thing. The non-hybrid version of that, the stock version, uses a heatsink to cool the GPU and still uses the base plate to cool the VRAM and the VRMs, and it's using one fan to cool all of those things. And you've got sort of greater saturation, we'll say, of the cooling ability of that stock cooler, especially on the, I'm talking reference cards here right now, on the reference cards. So there's a lot more heat in a smaller area, which changes, one, the heat that we measured on the VRAM because there's more surrounding heat, and two, sort of the thermal density, so to speak, of just that block area directly around the GPU, because it's going to run warmer anyway. So that's the first thing, is what are they cooling? The liquid cooled cards don't normally, but do sometimes cool the VRM and the VRAM. So that means that your temperatures are going to be more controlled, because that pump is really only responsible for one thing, whereas the rest of the card is handled by the normal base plate and the fan. The next thing, this is more of a fundamental thing, a couple more things actually, Let's start with thermal conductivity. Liquid has a greater thermal conductivity than air. So you've got to, well, and to add to that, the inside of the pump, the cold plate, has a whole lot of surface area. Those microfins are really dense. So it's got more surface area than it might seem. It's deceptive. And because the liquid's going through there, we've got better thermal dissipation potential than with air. Your thermal conductivity is higher. So it runs through, gets rid of the heat a lot quicker, one, depending on pump RPM, but just because of the thermal conductivity in general. And then it's got a higher specific heat capacity, liquid that is, than air does. So this means a few things. One of them that's not commonly discussed is that liquid cooling solutions have a better ability to soak thermal changes. So if you have, if you ever benchmark a CPU heat sink or CPU cooler or whatever, and you look at the temperatures of the CPU diode, you'll see that there are occasionally spikes that are really high and then they come down. It doesn't matter if it's a 7700K or something else. It just happens. With liquid coolers, they can soak those spikes a bit better because the liquid takes longer to heat up than air might, for example. And if you have a large volume of liquid, then even better. You can deal with the changes in a greater way. And a higher specific heat capacity does help in that regard as well. You take longer to reach a steady state as well with the liquid cooling than with air cooling. And I think that probably covers most of the basics that I've got written down for notes anyway that I can think of. But yeah, so the radiator fan goes pretty fast. There's a ton of surface area in that. There's surface area on the cold plate that helps out. Liquid gets the heat up and out of that hot spot very quickly because of the pump RPM. Goes through the radiator. You've got a pretty good amount of liquid in there, and it's cooled and then recycled. So that's the biggest thing. And then the next biggest thing is that you're not cooling every single component on the card, which is a big deal as well. I think that helps though. If you want to learn more about this stuff, I've mentioned him before, VSG from Thermal Bench. He knows this stuff in and out, so he would be someone to look to for more information. Last question is from Bocete or Bocete. I don't know how to say your name. From Discord as well. I'm going to go with Bocete. Asks GN questions, how do you cope with Senior AMD Analyst Snowflake around the office? Don't things go missing all the time? The answer is yes. The other day, I found a thermocouple cable that had wandered away from its post because it seemed like the kind of thing that she thought needed further analysis in the durability department, I guess. So yeah, things go missing sometimes. We can deploy very strategically deploy things like twist ties to redirect her attention in the event of an audit. So that's all for this one. As always, you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly. And through there, you can join our Discord server where we get more of these questions and try to pull them into this as well. If you're interested in the ads lately, we still have a coupon code with iFixit that's active. You can go to ifixit.com/gamersnexus and use code gamersnexus, or V1Tech, v1tech.com, use gamersnexus for the code, gamersnexus5 rather. And subscribe for more. I'll see you all next time.